morning to all of our viewers and listeners, and welcome to an edition of the program Addiction and Recovery. I am your moderator this morning, Jason Kalu. Join me as we welcome the host to the program Addiction and Recovery, Mr. Ramnes Daraka. Sit to Jason.
I'm Jason, and thank you very much for having me on the program. And let me join with you in welcoming all our listeners who follow the program in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as worldwide, because we are also on social media, on Facebook, and the programs are now being posted on YouTube as well under my name, Ramnarees Dwarika. So if you missed the program or you want to go back and refer to it at a later time, you may be able to access it on YouTube. As soon as the program is finished, within the next half an hour, I usually post it on YouTube. And I like to deal with different issues on different programs. So today, I would like to think we're going to have a special program. I want to make it very personal in that some of you know that I'm a person in recovery. And I'm saying that not to boast about it, but to let you know that none of us are insulated from addiction once we use a drug, a psychotropic drug, a mood-altering substances. As indeed, I started using it recreationally as a young man, out of curiosity. And although I came from a very, very respectable family, my great-grandfather and great-grandmother who came from India, they were sadhu and sadhwine, they were vegetarian, they never eat meat and all of that. And my parents were not ever heavy drinkers. My grandfather, he took a drink, he started drinking later in his life, and he was basically a binge drinker. He was not an everyday drinker. And so that I may have inherited the genetic predisposition from him. And just like most people in the community I grew up, the community itself were very strict. As a young man, you couldn't hold a beer and walk in the road and allow the elders to see you. Anyone had the license to caution you in those days. I grew up in South Trinidad, a small little village called Gandhi Village. And we grew up as a family in that community. As I say family, if you had to go to borrow something from a neighbor or anything, you could not call them by name. You had to say uncle or kaka or dada. These are the terms we use in Hindu Indian communities. So there was that respect in the community, and so there was that caring as well. And this is why it holds true that sometimes, no matter how strict you might be with your own children in the household, it still takes a community to bring up a child. Because in that same community, when I looked around, it was basically agrarian. Most of the people worked in the estate, currently limited, cutting cane in the crop time or working on the estate in this off-season time. And I would see the men going to the shop on their way from work. They'll go to the shop, the only rum shop in the village at the time, and they would drink, and some of them would remain until evening, and then they'd be drunk and going home and sleeping in the same clothes, some of them, and coming back to work the next morning. And these are influences that become indelible in a young, impressionable mind, to the extent where I remember I must have been just about 4 years old, and curiosity. In those days, the rum shops, Jason, had what we call the dry goods section and the rum shop section. And there was a little swinging door that separated it, you know. And young people like myself, children, of course, the license said that you are not supposed to sell alcohol to anyone under the age of 18. I think it is still so. But that was just something that was put up there for legal purposes. Nobody ever followed it as far as I know, not even up to today. So I might have been about 4 years old when I just walked across out of curiosity one morning, and take a penny and I knock on the counter, and the lady who I call Pua, Pua is normally the Hindi word for your father's sister, but she was not biologically related, but that's how I considered her. And Pua came and said, Nareswa, what you want? That's how she called me. My short name is Nares. And I knocked the counter and I said, I want a drink of rum. And she put a little bit of rum in a glass and put a lot of water in it. And she gave it to me. She thinks it was fun, you know, that I would come and ask for that. And I gave her my penny and I drank it. And boy, for the rest of my teenage life, every time Pua saw me and we were in a family gathering, she would relate that story, how I came and how I wiped my mouth after and walked out as if I were a big man, you know. And I've often gone back to that story because it reminds me that children learn what they see, what they observe. You understand? And it takes a community to bring up a child, not, I'm speaking especially to those mothers and parents, siblings who are listening to this program this morning, in the hope that they will understand that no matter how hard you try, your children are not insulated from these peer influences, from learning what they see around them, because you may not be doing it in your household. Yes, in our household, my father was strict. You couldn't bring a backpack of cards. No card playing, no gambling. There was a game called Guti. you know, I don't know for what reason he didn't even want us writing up the floor. He said it was a bad omen. So things like that. And so I grew up in a very strict household. But that did not insulate me later on when I would go with my friends by the river, and one of them had cigarettes. They would buy 2 cigarettes. There were some of them who had more privileges and whose parents were not as strict and whose parents were alcoholics themselves and smokers, and they will steal a cigarette or two from their father's pack and they will walk with it. And when we go by the riverside to bathe, of course, the cigarette will come out and all of us will take a pull. And that's how it started to happen. And so it did not matter, because now going back in my experience, I look at it, and the fact is I wanted to belong to that group. So if the rest of the young people, the teenagers, my friends, were doing something, I did not want to appear to be less than them. So if they were smoking, I would smoke too. I would step up to the plate, as we say. And that's a feature of early childhood development, where for both boys and girls, they don't want to seem to be less than or different from their friends. And where they are physically different, they try to make up for that. If you can't run as fast, you try to be good in some other way. And this is where sports can help, where if you're not doing well academically, you may excel in sports. So at least it helps to build your self-esteem. So I remember me and my friends walking down what is now the M2 Ring Road. And there was about 7 or 8 of us. And we did a lot of good things. We belonged to a gym. We would practice boxing and wrestling, and we played sports. But one of them had a brown paper bag with a bottle in it. And they took a drink and passed it to the other guy. And eventually it came to me. And I have often reflected on that. If it was poison, I'd be dead. Because I never questioned what was it in that brown bag bottle. Because 3 or 4 of my friends had already had a drink from it. I took the bag and I had a drink too, and it was strong rum. In those days, they call it strong rum. It's a mixture of very strong alcohol, and I don't know how they make the mixture, but it used to be stored in a barrel in the old shops in the old days, And boy, that thing blistered my throat going down. It was like if you had swallowed a strip of sandpaper. For almost the morning half day, I kept swallowing to mitigate the influence. But that experience tells me how powerful the peer group influence is. And I smiled and I passed it on to the other person as well. That seemed to be a sort of ritual in the group. And later on, I would see that when we smoke marijuana as well. You take a pull and you pass it to the other guy, and everyone will want to make it seem as though they were able to handle their stories. Later on, when I would drink heavily too, and I'd be sorely sick the next morning, feeling a sense of remorse, I'll still smile, even though I'd be heading to the cooler all the time. And the other friends who worked at the office now with me, and we had all drunk together the night before the evening, late into the night. We would be telling each other, hey, as we will want to show up the other one that he can't handle his stories. But the truth was inside, man, it was like fire and brimstone in my stomach, but I was smiling on the outside. And again, all of this has to do with peer pressure. And I'm saying this morning to say that, listen, although you will be as careful as you want, and you try to groom your children, you still are not 100% sure that they are not going to experiment or use drugs recreationally, so that you need to be prepared for that. Yes, Jason.
Let's take a quick break. I'm getting a signal from the director. So at this point, we'll take a short break and come right back. You're viewing the program Addiction and Recovery.
Over the past 2 decades, research on mindfulness, the science of happiness, and the neurobiology of the brain suggests that happiness is not a choice, but rather something we do. In fact, trying to be happy is counterproductive. So if trying to be happy doesn't work, then what does? Well, research indicates that practicing certain habits induces a sense of well-being.